My fiancée told me she was sleeping at her sister's. At 1 a.m., my buddy sent me a clip of her grinding on a guy at a basement party while another guy smacked her waist. When I showed up and turned the music off, I had no reason to doubt her that night, which is the part that still bothers me more than the video itself. The evening started the way dozens of others had started since we got engaged, quietly and without friction, the kind of calm that tricks you into thinking stability equals safety. We ate late, talked about logistics instead of feelings, and drifted into separate corners of the apartment. Nothing felt wrong enough to stay alert. Nothing felt important enough to argue about. She told me she was going to sleep at her sister's place because it was closer to work the next morning. She said it casually while tying her hair back, already halfway out of the bedroom. I nodded without looking up. We had shared locations. We had shared calendars. We had shared an engagement ring and a wedding date. This did not feel like a moment that required scrutiny. After she left, the apartment felt larger than usual. I cleaned the kitchen, answered a few emails, and watched something mindless until I realized I was just letting time pass. Around midnight, I went to bed expecting nothing more than another quiet night where trust did not need to be tested. My phone was face down on the nightstand. I did not hear it vibrate the first time. The second vibration pulled me out of half sleep. The screen lit up with my friend Luca's name. That alone was strange because Luca never called or messaged after midnight unless something was wrong. He was not dramatic and not impulsive. If he reached out at that hour, it meant he had already spent time deciding whether to do it. The message was not text. It was a video. I sat up before pressing play, already feeling the shift in my body, the kind of tension that tightens your jaw before your mind catches up. The clip was short, less than 20 seconds, shaky, and poorly lit. The camera angle came from above, probably someone holding their phone near the ceiling. Colored lights flashed across a low basement ceiling. Music thumped hard enough that the image vibrated. Then I saw her. There was no delay where I had to convince myself. Her face turned slightly toward the camera, hair loose, shoulders bare. She was pressed against a man I did not recognize, moving with him in a way that erased any doubt about intent. Her hips followed his rhythm while another man stood behind her with his hand flat against her waist, casual and familiar, like this was already normalized. The crowd around them was dense and indifferent. No one was watching because no one needed to. The clip ended abruptly. I replayed it without blinking. Then again, my phone vibrated immediately afterward with another message from Luca, this time text. He said he did not know how to send it without making it worse. He said he had been at a friend's place nearby, and someone had recognized her from photos on his phone. He said the party was still going. He included the address without commentary. I did not respond. I sat there for a full minute, staring at the wall across from my bed while my brain tried to introduce alternatives that did not exist. It tried to frame the clip as misleading, the angle deceptive, the moment out of context. None of those thoughts survived longer than a few seconds because the body language in the video was too relaxed to be accidental. Nothing about her posture suggested surprise or discomfort. Nothing about the men suggested hesitation. I got dressed without rushing. My movements were steady in a way that felt artificial, like my body had taken over while my mind lagged behind. I grabbed my keys, checked my phone battery, and paused briefly at the door, not because I was unsure, but because I understood that once I left, the night would split into a before and after. The drive across town felt shorter than usual. Traffic lights changed in my favor. Streets were quiet. I replayed the clip at red lights, not to torture myself, but to make sure my memory would not soften it later. I needed accuracy more than comfort. When I turned onto the street Luca had sent, I recognized the house immediately. It was one of those half-finished places people rented for parties because the neighbors had given up complaining. Cars were lined up on both sides of the road. Music bled through the walls so loudly that it distorted the air. I parked 2 blocks away and walked. Halfway down the street, I noticed a pair of shoes near the curb that I recognized instantly. I had bought them with her 3 months earlier because she liked how they looked, but said they were impractical. Seeing them there, abandoned and careless, did something worse than the video had. It collapsed the last distance between denial and reality. The front door was unlocked. Inside, the house smelled like sweat and alcohol and something sweet burning in the background. People crowded the hallway, cups in their hands, bodies pressed too close. No one looked at me because no one had a reason to. I moved through the space without pushing, without speaking, letting the current of bodies carry me toward the sound. The basement stairs were narrow. The music grew heavier with each step. Colored lights flickered against exposed beams. The ceiling was low enough that taller people had to lean forward. I saw her again before I reached the bottom. She was in the same place, near the center, moving differently now, but still connected to the same group. The man from the video leaned close to say something into her ear. She smiled. I did not call her name. I walked to the DJ booth instead. The person controlling the music barely noticed me until I reached over and pulled the power. The sound cut out instantly, leaving behind a ringing silence that felt physical. Conversations froze mid-motion. The sudden absence of noise drew every eye in the room to the source. To me, then to her. She looked at me with recognition, then irritation, not shock. Her expression shifted quickly, as if she were annoyed at an interruption rather than exposed in a lie. The people around her followed her gaze and then looked back at me, confused and alert, waiting to see which version of the night this was going to become. I stood there without raising my voice, without gesturing, without giving anyone a script to follow. I was aware of my heartbeat and of how still my hands were. The silence stretched long enough to become uncomfortable. She stepped away from the men and walked toward me. Her first reaction was not explanation. It was accusation. She told me I had no right to embarrass her like this. She told me this was not what it looked like and that I was making a scene over nothing. She said my timing was always terrible. I did not respond immediately. I scanned the room instead, registering faces, expressions, the way some people already seemed to know more than they should. I noticed how no one looked surprised. I noticed how quickly the men near her stepped back, not in fear, but in practiced retreat. Someone turned the music back on at a lower volume without being asked. She leaned closer and lowered her voice, telling me we would talk about it later, telling me this was not the place, telling me to stop acting like this. The familiarity of her tone felt surreal, like she was addressing a minor inconvenience rather than a fundamental collapse. I asked her where her sister was. She hesitated for half a second too long. That pause was small, almost invisible, but it confirmed something important. It told me this was not a misunderstanding unfolding in real time. It told me this night had been planned with contingencies. It told me I was late to a version of the story that had already been rehearsed. People around us began to shift again, conversations restarting in cautious fragments. The moment was losing focus. If I stayed, it would turn into noise and interpretation. If I argued, it would become spectacle. I chose to leave. As I turned toward the stairs, she called after me, telling me we were not finished, telling me to stop being dramatic, telling me we would deal with it at home. I did not look back. The words followed me up the stairs, lighter and less convincing with each step. Outside, the night air felt sharp. I stood on the sidewalk longer than necessary, grounding myself before walking back to the car. My phone vibrated again. This time, it was a notification from our shared account, a transaction that made no sense for the day. She claimed she was elsewhere. I sat in the driver's seat with the engine off, staring at the screen, realizing that the video had not been the beginning of the night after all. It had just been the part one was allowed to see. I did not drive home right away. I sat in the car with the engine running, watching people drift in and out of the house like nothing meaningful had just happened. The party resumed faster than it should have, which told me something important. This interruption was not rare enough to scare them. It had happened before, or at least something close enough that no one felt the need to panic. The notification on my phone stayed open on the screen. A charge from earlier that evening, not large enough to scream theft, but specific enough to demand explanation. It was for a rideshare pickup across town, nowhere near her sister's place. The timestamp lined up perfectly with the moment she would have told me she was settling in for the night. I took screenshots without fully understanding why. Some part of me had already switched into preservation mode. I was no longer trying to understand her. I was trying to protect myself from whatever shape this was about to take. When I finally drove home, the apartment felt unfamiliar, like it belonged to someone else. Her things were still there, arranged neatly, untouched. Shoes by the door, jacket on the chair, a half-packed bag she must have prepared before leaving. The sight of it reframed the night again. This was not spontaneous. This was planned with the assumption of safety. I slept badly and woke early without meaning to. There was a message from her waiting on my phone, sent an hour after I left the party. It framed the night as a misunderstanding, something exaggerated by lighting and alcohol, something I had blown out of proportion by showing up unannounced. She suggested we talk later when emotions were calmer. The phrasing was careful, polished, like she had already rehearsed it aloud. I did not reply. Instead, I drove to her sister's place. I had been there enough times to recognize the pattern of parked cars. Her sister was usually awake early, rushing to get out the door, always running behind. That morning, her car was still there. The blinds were half closed. She answered the door wearing clothes she clearly slept in, confusion turning into recognition the moment she saw my face. I did not accuse her or raise my voice. I simply asked whether my fiancé had stayed there the night before. Her sister hesitated. It was the same pause, the same fraction of a second too long, the same internal calculation about what version of the truth I was allowed to receive. She stepped aside and let me in. We sat at the kitchen table with mugs of coffee neither of us touched. She told me she had not expected me to come. She told me she was sorry. She told me this was not how she wanted me to find out. None of that mattered as much as what followed. She admitted she had been covering for her, not just once, but regularly. Sleepovers that never happened. Late nights that were explained away as family time. She said she did it because she was asked to, and because it seemed easier than fighting. She said she did not think it would go this far. I asked her how long. She gave me a number that rewired the timeline in my head. Months. Long enough to overlap with our engagement. Long enough to include holidays, plans, conversations about the future that I had believed were shared in good faith. I asked her whether anyone else knew. She looked down at the table before answering. That was when I understood this was not just about infidelity. This was about a system. This was about people choosing convenience over honesty and assuming I would never notice. I left her sister's place with more information than I wanted and less clarity than I needed. On the drive back, I received a call from a mutual friend, someone who had not been at the party. He asked whether everything was okay. His tone was too cautious to be casual. I asked him what he meant. He admitted he had heard about the confrontation already. The story circulating was not flattering. It described me as jealous, impulsive, and controlling. It framed the party as harmless and my reaction as unstable. The speed at which this narrative had spread was impressive. I realized she had not followed me outside to apologize because she had stayed behind to manage the damage. When I returned to the apartment, she was there. She had arrived before me and positioned herself carefully, sitting at the table, calm and composed, as if waiting for a scheduled conversation. She did not ask where I had been. She asked why I had humiliated her. I told her I had been at her sister's place. Her expression changed then, not dramatically, but enough to register. The irritation faded, replaced by something sharper. She accused her sister of betraying her trust. She accused me of going behind her back. She said this did not justify what I had done the night before. I asked her how many times she had told me she was somewhere she was not. She did not answer directly. Instead, she reframed again, telling me I was focusing on the wrong thing, telling me relationships were not about surveillance, telling me trust required flexibility. She said the party was not about me and did not need to be explained to me in detail. The way she said it made something click. This was not guilt talking. This was entitlement. I asked her about the charge on the account. She said she forgot to tell me. I asked her about the men in the video. She said I was misinterpreting their familiarity. I asked her whether she planned to marry me. She said I was making her uncomfortable. That was when she changed tactics. She warned me to be careful about how I handled this publicly. She said people already thought my reaction had been extreme. She said if I kept pushing, the story could turn against me quickly. She mentioned how easily concern could be mistaken for control and how narratives tend to stick once they spread. I understood the implication clearly. This was no longer about explaining herself. This was about leverage. I did not argue. I told her I needed time. I asked her to stay somewhere else for the night. She laughed and told me it was my apartment too, implying that she did not intend to give ground. She reminded me that our names were both on the lease. She reminded me that ending things would be messy and expensive. That night, I slept on the couch while she moved around the apartment as if nothing had changed. She showered. She answered messages. She laughed at something on her phone. The normalcy felt deliberate, like an assertion of dominance. I woke up early again. This time my phone was full. Messages from friends asking what happened. Messages from people I barely knew offering opinions. Messages warning me to calm down and not make things worse. One message stood out among the rest. It was from Luca. He told me he needed to talk. He told me there was more he had not said the night before because he did not want to overwhelm me. He told me he had seen something similar weeks earlier, but assumed I already knew. He said other people had made the same assumption. That sentence stayed with me longer than anything else. Everyone assumed I knew. Later that day, I met Luca in person. He explained that the party was not an isolated event. There had been others. Different houses. Different groups. Same patterns. He said no one framed it as cheating because it was easier to label it as her being social. He said he regretted not telling me sooner, but convinced himself it was not his place. I thanked him for sending the video anyway. By the time I returned home, she was gone. A note on the counter told me she would be staying with friends for a few days and that we would talk when I was ready to be reasonable. I stood in the apartment alone, surrounded by shared furniture and shared plans, realizing that the engagement had already ended somewhere between the basement party and the morning coffee at her sister's table. What I did not realize yet was how many people had participated in keeping me last in line to find out, and how expensive that delay was about to become. The apartment stayed quiet for 2 days after she left, the kind of quiet that feels staged, like it is waiting for something else to happen. I moved through rooms without purpose, noticing details that suddenly felt symbolic. The empty space in the closet where her favorite jacket had been. The charger missing from the bedside table. The way shared objects now felt like evidence rather than comfort. I did not reach out to her. I was no longer interested in explanations that arrived pre-edited. Instead, I started retracing the last few months with a different lens. I scrolled through messages, not to analyze tone, but to check timing. I compared nights. She said she was busy with events I had dismissed as coincidences. Patterns emerged quickly once I stopped giving her the benefit of the doubt. Late replies, gaps that aligned too cleanly, excuses that repeated with minor variations. I did not feel rage yet. I felt something colder, something closer to disbelief that I had been the only person operating without a backup narrative. That realization hardened the moment I stepped outside. The building manager stopped me in the hallway and asked whether everything was okay upstairs. He said there had been noise complaints recently. He said my fiancé's friends had been over late more than once while I was away. He phrased it casually, not accusatory, but the implication landed anyway. I thanked him and walked out. The next call came from someone I did not expect. It was a co-worker of hers, someone I had met only once at a holiday gathering. She said she felt uncomfortable reaching out, but thought I should know. She told me she had seen my fiancé at another party weeks earlier, one that was not public and not crowded. She said she had assumed I was aware because of how relaxed everyone seemed. She said my name had come up jokingly, framed as an obstacle rather than a partner. That was the moment the second twist locked into place. This was not just hidden behavior. This was behavior that had been normalized socially while I remained intentionally excluded. I asked how many people knew. She did not answer directly. She just said more than I would be comfortable with. Later that afternoon, my phone buzzed with a notification from our shared calendar. A reminder for a tasting appointment we were supposed to attend together. I deleted it without hesitation. The finality of that small action hit harder than expected. It felt like dismantling something physical. She reached out that evening. Her tone was different this time. Less defensive, more strategic. She said she wanted to talk in person and suggested a neutral place. She framed it as closure, not reconciliation. I agreed, not because I wanted closure, but because I understood avoidance would be interpreted as guilt. We met at a cafe near the apartment, somewhere public enough to discourage dramatics. She arrived composed, dressed carefully, as if aware she was being evaluated even now. She did not apologize. She opened by saying she was disappointed in how I had handled the situation. She said my decision to cut the music had humiliated her in front of people who mattered. She said trust had been broken on both sides. She said relationships required privacy, not surveillance. She said my reaction had forced her to defend herself. I asked her what exactly she was defending. She leaned back and looked at me like I was missing something obvious. She said the parties were not about cheating, but about freedom. She said monogamy did not mean isolation. She said I had benefited from her stability while ignoring her need for excitement. Then she said something that changed everything. She told me that if I continued talking about this publicly, she would describe our relationship very differently than I had. She said people were already inclined to believe her. She said concern could easily be reframed as control, especially when men reacted emotionally. She said she had messages, moments, witnesses who could support that interpretation if necessary. It was not a threat delivered with anger. It was a calculation delivered calmly. That was the third plot twist. This was not just betrayal. This was preemptive damage control that included the option to burn me down socially if I resisted. I did not raise my voice. I told her I would not speak about her publicly. I told her I would speak about myself accurately if asked. I told her I had no interest in continuing the engagement. She smiled faintly, as if relieved, and said that was probably for the best. 2 hours later, her parents called. They asked to meet. I had not contacted them. I had not intended to. The fact that they reached out told me she had not controlled the narrative as tightly as she thought. Someone else had spoken, maybe her sister, maybe someone who was tired of covering. We met at their house that evening. The tension was immediate and unfiltered. Her mother looked exhausted. Her father avoided eye contact until I sat down. They did not ask me what happened. They asked me whether it was true. I told them exactly what I had seen and exactly what I had been told afterward. I did not embellish. I did not editorialize. I stuck to timelines, actions, confirmations. Her sister was there too, silent and pale. When my fiancée arrived halfway through the conversation, the room shifted instantly. She accused her sister of betrayal before anyone else spoke. She accused me of exaggeration. She framed the night as one mistake magnified by insecurity. Her father interrupted her. He asked her how many times she had lied about where she was sleeping. She did not answer. He asked her whether she planned to marry me. She hesitated. That hesitation ended the engagement more definitively than anything I could have said. Her parents told her she could not stay there if she continued to deny reality. They told her the wedding was off until further notice. They told her they needed space. She left without looking at me. The fallout accelerated after that. Friends took sides quietly. Invitations stopped coming. Group chats went silent. People who had once treated us as a unit now treated us as separate liabilities. Rumors filled the gaps where facts were uncomfortable. At work, I was pulled aside by human resources and asked whether everything was okay at home. The question was framed gently, but it was not casual. Someone had raised concerns. I answered honestly without providing details. I said the engagement had ended and that there was nothing affecting my performance. I left that meeting understanding that I was now operating under observation. She moved between friends' apartments for weeks, wearing out her welcome quickly. Her sister stopped responding to her messages. The men from the parties faded into silence once the situation lost its novelty. I stayed in the apartment alone, dealing with practicalities instead of emotions. I spoke to the landlord. I separated accounts. I canceled vendors. Each step felt administrative but final. One evening, Luca called again. He told me people were asking questions now, not out of concern, but out of curiosity. He told me my fiancée had framed the breakup as mutual but unstable. He told me some people believed her and others did not. He told me the truth was becoming less important than which version was easier to repeat. That was when I understood something crucial. This was no longer about proving what happened. This was about surviving the consequences of telling it. And those consequences were only beginning. The consequences did not arrive all at once. They came in waves, uneven and unpredictable, each one forcing a new adjustment. I learned quickly that endings like this do not announce themselves with clarity. They linger, complicate routines, and turn neutral spaces into reminders. The first wave hit professionally. 2 days after the meeting with her parents, I was asked to speak with a senior manager. Not because of performance, but because someone had raised concerns about my behavior outside of work. The phrasing was careful, deliberately vague, but the message was unmistakable. A narrative was forming, and it had reached a place where documentation mattered more than intent. I did not accuse her. I did not speculate. I stated facts. I said the engagement ended after I discovered repeated dishonesty about her whereabouts. I said there was no ongoing conflict, no harassment, no retaliation. I provided dates and kept emotion out of it. The meeting ended politely, but the tone afterward changed. Colleagues became distant. Conversations shortened. I was no longer invisible in the way you want to be at work. That same week, the landlord contacted me. She had called him first. She claimed the apartment had become uncomfortable and requested a lease adjustment. She did not accuse me directly, but she implied instability. The landlord asked whether everything was okay and whether mediation was necessary. I explained that she had moved out voluntarily and that I was willing to assume full responsibility for the lease. He agreed, but not without documentation. Another paper trail. Another quiet acknowledgement that someone else's story was being weighed against mine. Financial disentanglement followed. We closed the shared account. I transferred balances. I canceled subscriptions I had not realized were tied to her email. Each small task uncovered another assumption I had made about permanence. It became clear how deeply integrated our lives had been and how much effort it took to reverse that integration without creating new damage. Meanwhile, her situation deteriorated faster than she expected. She stayed with friends at first, rotating between couches and spare rooms. At the beginning, she framed it as temporary freedom. She posted photos that suggested independence and relief. The captions were optimistic in a way that felt defensive. Then the invitations stopped. Friends grew tired of being intermediaries. The excitement of scandal faded, replaced by inconvenience. She began asking to return to the apartment to collect items she had left behind. I agreed, but insisted on being present. The exchanges were tense, but civil. She avoided eye contact and focused on logistics, as if the emotional weight could be managed by pretending it did not exist. Her sister cut contact completely. I did not ask her to choose sides. She made the decision on her own. She told me later that she had spent months justifying lies that never benefited her. She said the video had forced her to see how easily she had been used. That admission carried its own grief. She had lost a sister and gained clarity, and neither outcome felt like a win. The wedding vendors began reaching out. Cancellations triggered fees. Deposits were lost. Conversations I never expected to have took place with strangers who knew our names, but not our context. Each call required a brief explanation that I kept neutral and factual. The repetition numbed me. By the end, the wedding existed only as a financial wound and a collection of unopened emails. Her parents stopped returning her calls. They did not cut her off financially, but they withdrew emotional support. They refused to host her. They postponed any discussion of reconciliation until she could acknowledge what happened without deflection. She interpreted this as punishment. They interpreted it as boundaries. The gap between those interpretations widened quickly. The second wave hit socially. Mutual friends fractured into smaller groups. Some reached out privately to apologize for not speaking up earlier. Others stayed silent, choosing comfort over clarity. I learned who valued honesty only when it was convenient and who valued it even when it cost them access. Rumors continued, but they lost momentum. The version of events that painted me as volatile required constant reinforcement. Without new incidents to support it, it began to feel forced. People moved on to easier stories. The truth did not replace the rumor. It simply outlasted it. One evening, weeks later, she showed up unannounced. She stood outside the apartment door, looking tired in a way that could not be styled away. She said she needed to talk. She said she had underestimated the fallout. She said she had not expected to lose so many people so quickly. I listened without inviting her inside. She admitted the parties had been about validation more than rebellion. She admitted she had liked the attention and assumed it would never touch her real life. She admitted she thought I would forgive her eventually because I always had before, even if the circumstances were different this time. I did not argue. I told her the engagement was over and would remain over. I told her I wished her stability, but not proximity. I told her I would not participate in reshaping the past to soften the present. She asked whether there was any chance we could be friends. I told her no. That conversation closed something important. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was final without cruelty. She left quietly. I locked the door and felt no urge to reopen it. The last wave arrived slowly, almost unnoticed. The absence of constant vigilance. I stopped checking my phone compulsively. I stopped wondering who knew what. I reclaimed routines without needing to justify them. The apartment began to feel like mine again, not because it changed, but because the tension had drained out of it. Months later, I ran into one of the men from the video by accident. He looked uncomfortable and tried to avoid eye contact. He did not apologize. He did not explain. He did not need to. His presence carried no weight anymore. He was a reminder of a moment, not a threat to the future. I learned later that she moved again, this time to a smaller place farther out of the city. Her social circle narrowed. Her career stalled temporarily due to the distraction and instability. None of this felt like revenge. It felt like gravity. As for me, I paid a price too. Trust did not reset automatically. I questioned instincts I once relied on. I noticed hesitation where confidence used to live. Healing was not linear or inspirational. It was administrative and quiet. But the cost of knowing was still lower than the cost of staying. The night she said she was sleeping at her sister's could have ended differently if someone had chosen honesty earlier. It did not. It ended with exposure, not because I sought it, but because silence had already done enough damage. Some people call that escalation. I call it consequence.